We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. Greetings. Today we just want to have some reflections on the life, the death, as we commemorate 50 years since the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But we come on singing that song, We Shall Overcome, because that was a song that was what we might say a signature song, sung by many civil rights workers. Children and teenagers alike were part of that movement during the late 50s and the 60s. And so the question is today, have we overcome, or how far have we come since Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech at the Lincoln Memorial, August 28, 1963. But today we reflect on the mountaintop speech, the speech that he gave the night before he was assassinated at the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis, Tennessee, 1968. And that speech was so poignant because it was prophetic. If you ever get a chance to look at the footage and you could look at the gleam in his eye, you would see that Dr. King was well aware that his life not only had been threatened, but that it was just imminent. It would probably happen not in a long time, but in a short time to come. And as we know, he was felled by assassin's bullet on April 4th, 1968. So we would just like to share an excerpt from his last speech given at the Mason Temple in Memphis, Tennessee, the night before he was killed. You know, several years ago, I was in New York City autographing the first book that I had written. And while sitting there autographing books, a demented black woman came up. The only question I heard from her was, "Are you Martin Luther King?" And I was looking down, writing, and I said yes. And the next minute, I felt something beating on my chest. Before I knew it, I had been stabbed by this demented woman. I was rushed to the Harlem hospital, and it was a dark Sunday or Saturday afternoon. And that blade had gone through, and the x-rays revealed that the tip of the blade was on the edge of my aorta, the main artery. And once that's punctured, you drown in your own blood, and that's the end of you. Well, it came out in the New York Times the next morning that if I had sneezed, I would have died. Well, about 4 days later, they allowed me, after the operation, after my chest had been opened and the blade had been taken out, to move around in the wheelchair in the hospital. And they allowed me to read some of the mail that came in from all over the nation and all over the world. Kind letters came in. I read a few, but one of them I will never forget. I had received one of them from the president and the vice president. I've forgotten what those telegrams said. I'd received the visit and the letter from the governor of New York, but I'd forgotten what that letter had said. But there was another letter that came from a little girl, a young girl who was a student at the White Plains High School, and I looked at that letter, and I'll never forget it. It said simply, "Dear Dr. King, I am a 9th grade student at the White Plains High School." She said, "While it should not matter, I would like to mention that I am a white girl. And I read in the paper of your misfortune and of your suffering. And I read that if you had sneezed, you would have died. And I'm simply writing you to say that I'm so happy that you didn't sneeze. And I want to say tonight, I want to say that I am happy that I didn't sneeze. Because if I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around in 1960 when students all over the South started sitting in at lunch counters. And I knew that as they were sitting in, they were really standing up for the best in the American dream and taking hold the whole nation back to those great wells of democracy which were dug deep in the founding fathers in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And if I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around in 1962 when Negroes in Albany, Georgia decided to straighten their backs up. And whenever men and women straighten up their backs, they're going somewhere, because a man can't ride your back unless it's bent. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been here in 1963 when the black people of Birmingham, Alabama aroused the consciousness of this nation and brought into being the Civil Rights Bill. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have had a chance later that year in August to try to tell America about a dream that I had. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been down in Selma, Alabama, been in Memphis to see the community rally around those brothers and sisters who were suffering. And I'm so happy that I didn't sneeze. And they were telling me now it doesn't matter now. And it really doesn't matter what happens now. I left Atlanta this morning, and as we got started on the plane, there were 6 of us. The pilot said over the public address system, "We're sorry for the delay, but we have Dr. Martin Luther King on the plane." And to be sure of the bags were checked, and to be sure that nothing would be wrong with the plane, we had to check out everything carefully. And we've had the plane protected and guarded all night. And then I got to Memphis, and some began to say the threats or talk about the threats that were out. What would happen to me from some of our sick white brothers? Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it doesn't really matter to me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. And I don't mind, like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will, and He's allowed me to go to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land, but I may not get there with you. And I want you to know that we as a people will get to the promised land. And I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. I was born by the river in a little tent. Oh, like a river, I've been running ever since. It's been a long, long